Hello, hello all. Welcome as we watch me sit here quietly for just a little while we let some people see that the broadcast is going on. A few people start watching and then we'll get started. So welcome to all those who are starting to come in now, watching the video. As I said, we'll get started shortly. Just give a few minutes for people to come in and start watching the broadcast. Welcome everyone. As you start to join, make sure that you say hi, let me know that you're watching, let me know who's out there, and we will be getting started in just a couple of minutes. So welcome everyone. So we're going to get started in about 1 minute's time. I'm just going to launch into it, but if you're watching now, say hi. Let me know who's on board and watching us. I can see that we've got quite a few people now joining in. Hi Graham, welcome again. Thanks for joining in. So as we start to build up some numbers now, we will get started very shortly. All right, so 30 more seconds. We'll just let a few more people come in and then I will get started. So tonight is very much a general discussion about multiple sclerosis research, being World MS Day today. So happy World MS Day to everyone. But I thought a good opportunity to come in and do another update. It's been a little while since we've done one of these videos, so a good time to come in and talk about all things MS research related. Hi Sally, welcome. We're here in Melbourne at the moment. Welcome from Armidale. Great to have you on board. So last week I was actually in Sydney for the ANZAN conference, the Australia and New Zealand Association of Neurologists conference. So I got to hear about some interesting MS research at that meeting. And I'll be happy to talk about some of that tonight. Some of the topics that I'll be talking about will be to do with that. But really, tonight is an opportunity for you guys as well to ask questions. So if you've been here before, you probably know the drill. If you're new to one of our Facebook Live videos, to ask questions, all you have to do is type them in the comments box. I'll see them scrolling as we go through, and I will answer essentially every question that you ask. So any general sort of questions about multiple sclerosis, but in particular multiple sclerosis research, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So as we go through, send your questions and ask anything you want to ask. Have you seen something online about a breakthrough in MS research that you want to know about? Have you seen stuff that we've posted on MStranslate before that you want to know more about? Do you want to know more about MStranslate in general? Do you want to know more about who I am and what we do? Really anything. It's a free discussion tonight. There's no general theme. It's just MS and MS research being World MS Day. So as I said, we've got can see a bunch of new people have started watching. So if you have just joined, say hi, let me know who's there. And so that other people are aware that the broadcast has started, if you can like the post, share the post, drop a comment, all of those things help other people in your network who may be interested in watching as well, see that the broadcast is going and can join in. So just as we're going on, keep that going because we want as many people as possible participating. And really what I enjoy about this is getting to talk to you guys and answer your questions. So definitely drop as many comments as you can on the videos we go through so that it's not just me talking. I'm sure that'll be boring for you guys, and it's more interesting for me as well if I can answer your questions. So that's probably enough of an intro from me. Let's get into the things that we want to talk about. And the first thing that I guess we will talk about is a little bit about the probably biggest advances in MS research in 2019 and what was a big topic of the conference last week, which is really talking about the most appropriate way to treat MS. So there's been quite a bit of research published this year that has really looked into that question. And I guess it builds on a few findings that we've had. The first finding, and this is what I'm really going to be focusing on, is a paper that was published earlier this year. It was a Melbourne-led paper along with a researcher from the University of Cambridge that looked into whether or not multiple sclerosis treatments are actually working in the long term. So previously, all that we'd known about these treatments is that they were effective, and they were quite effective in doing things like stopping relapses. So in the short term, they were able to reduce relapses and things like this. But this was one of the first publications, or the first publication, that actually showed that these treatments were having a benefit in the long term. And I've just posted the link in the comments section now, the links to the written article that we've done about this study before. So if you're interested, you can find some more information out there. But what they showed was that all of the current MS treatments were effective in delaying the onset of progressive disease. So what does that mean? When they looked at people with relapsing remitting MS and compared those of them that were on treatment and those of them that weren't on any treatments, they found that the people on treatment took longer to convert to secondary progressive MS. So this was actually a really interesting finding that showed that MS treatments were actually delaying that onset of progressive disease, so having long-term benefits. But probably the finding that initiated this discussion or led some evidence into the answer of the discussion of the best way to treat was a couple of other things that they found. And that was, firstly, that delay was more significant if the treatments happened earlier, so within the first 5 years of onset. But also that delay was more significant if the treatments used were the higher efficacy treatments. So those stronger type drugs. And so this has led to a discussion in the poll that we did on MStranslate recently about the two different approaches to treating MS and what's the best way to do it. Now, obviously, this is just talking about in terms of using disease-modifying therapies. We talk a lot about other ways of helping to manage MS as well in terms of diet and lifestyle and exercise and things like that, and they remain important, and we can talk about those throughout the conversation tonight as well. But purely in terms of the best strategy for using disease-modifying therapies. And there's these two different approaches. One is called escalation, which essentially means that people are started on the lower efficacy drugs or the weaker drugs, but those that have less side effects to them. And then if they fail those medications, then they go on to progressively stronger treatments until they find one that works. The other strategy is what's called the induction strategy, where people are started on the high efficacy therapies or the highly effective therapies first, knowing that they come with more side effects, but that they give the best chance of stopping the disease progression. And so this is a big conversation at the moment in the MS research world and in the between MS neurologists as to what is the most appropriate way of doing that. And it's a difficult question to answer, and the poll threw up some interesting results from the community. So I think that there are really different opinions from people in terms of what they think is the best approach to it. And that's always going to come into it. And I think that that's still part of the discussion that is being had at these conferences, is that personal choice is always going to play a role in this. So we can't have a set method. But certainly the community seems split on it as well, in terms of I want the thing that's going to give me the best chance of delaying disease versus, I don't want to take something that's going to have all of these potential risks and potential side effects. The argument for the escalation treatment is that some people will never need anything more than the sort of softer drugs, the lower efficacy drugs, is that they will be sufficient to actually control MS in a lot of people, or in some people anyway. And so treating them with a much stronger drug is overkill and exposes them to side effects that they don't necessarily need. Unfortunately, we're not at a point yet where we can understand that. And so, being able to predict who does need the higher efficacy drugs, who does need the lower efficacy drugs, would make this conversation a lot easier. But until we're at that point, this is a conversation that's going on. So as we're talking, and I can see that there's quite a few people watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We did the poll, but tell me, if you were making that decision now, what strategy would you want to use? Would you want to go for the one that had the least side effects and hope that that was sufficient for you? Or would you want to go with the strongest one first, to knowing that it comes with added side effects, but is the most likely to be able to delay the disease, delay progression of the disease? Add your comments, because I'm really interested in hearing about that and having a discussion about it. Sally, how do they decide which way to go, escalation or induction? Is it based on symptoms? So certainly there is some indication of how aggressive the disease is and how active the disease is that will help make that decision. But a lot of it is in terms of a discussion with the individual. Sorry, for some reason, whenever I do one of these, about 10 minutes in, I start to lose my voice. We'll push through. So it's a discussion with the individual in terms of, this is what we're seeing at the moment in terms of how aggressive your disease is. The more aggressive the disease, the more likely they are to go for an induction strategy. But, it's also got to do with things like the stage of life that people are at. Are they planning on having a family in the near future? Then certain medications may be more appropriate than others for something like that. So there are a lot of factors that come into play. I wrote an article a little while ago, which I will link under here as well, that talks about personalized medicine and the ability to predict how disease will progress in people with MS, because obviously the difficulty at the moment is we don't know any two people are very different in terms of how they will respond to treatments, in terms of how they will progress. So being able to predict and personalize is the goal, and this was one of the other topics of the conference last week, was shifting towards personalized medicine. And what you'll see in that article is that we're actually, it sounds science fiction almost in terms of being able to predict the future, especially when we're talking about something as complicated as MS. But we're getting to a point now where it's not that unrealistic because of the fact that we have a number of databases around the world that has been collecting huge amounts of clinical data from people living with MS over many years now. And so what that means is that we might get to a point where we can take an individual comes in for a meeting with their neurologist, and we're asking these questions, what's the best treatment? Instead of having this discussion of, going, these are the different options, these are the side effects, let's try and make a decision about it. We start to get to a point where the decision could be made on a whole heap of real world observations and real world data. So you take an individual and you say, okay, based on everything we have in the database, we can look at, 10,000 people, 1,000 people who are most like you in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of age that the multiple sclerosis started, in terms of symptoms, MRI results, all of these different things. And they go, of those 1,000 people, we can see what medications they took, and we can see how they've progressed over a long term. Now, of those 1,000 people, we found that the best outcomes came from those taking Gilenya or those taking Tysabri or something like that. And so they go, this is strong evidence. We would recommend that that's what you take. Now, there's obviously always going to be that conversation in terms of whether or not the individual wants to go down that path, but at least then we're shifting towards making decisions based on extensive amounts of data and being able to see, use evidence from the past and individuals in the past to predict how an individual might progress. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think for me, that's a really exciting new area of research and a new exciting potential outcome, because a long time ago when I started in the field of multiple sclerosis, it amazed me that the process really was, you go in, you've been diagnosed, and it's here are a bunch of brochures on different treatments. You decide what you want, and that's obviously a hugely difficult decision for an individual to make, and I think that process has changed already. But if we can get to a process where a neurologist can say, we have the data, drug, whatever, looks like the best one for you, that's what we would recommend based on the information that we have. I think that's quite a big step forward. But what are your thoughts on that for everyone that's watching? Thoughts on that? I'm interested to hear. Sally, I think treat it like cancer, kick it in the ass straight off the bat. Just my thoughts on the experience. Yeah, and I mean that is essentially a very nicely way of phrasing how the how the induction therapy works. Instead of wasting time where the disease might not be controlled by these other treatments, go with the most powerful treatment first, give it the best chance of being kicked in the ass, stopped in its tracks, so that we're not wasting time where more damage is occurring. But the flip side is it may be overkill, and it's giving people side effects and risks of side effects that they might not need. It's tough. It's really tough. Continue giving me your thoughts on that as we go through. So that's really where the treatment discussion is at the moment. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, because I'm happy to talk more about that as we continue on. Kessel, 96 started self-injection to beta interferon, was on it for 10 years with one break to have a baby. Yeah, and I mean, that's assuming that worked for you. I mean, that's then the flip side is that, you know, beta interferon, quite safe, not as many side effects as the new ones that are coming out. You know, if someone can manage their MS using something like that, then, you know, is that a better outcome? So it sounds great to have all that info, but how much do we currently have? We are in a point now where we have a lot, and that's the thing. But now, where research is at is trying to understand the best ways of analysing that. And if you talk to the guys leading this sort of charge, so there was 2 people in particular who presented at the ANZAN conference. One was Associate Professor Thomas Kalinchik, who you would know if you followed MStranslate for a while. He's been a big supporter of what we do, and he's appeared regularly on this page. So he's here at the University of Melbourne, and he does a lot of work with the MS Base team. And so MS Base is about 100, and I've got this information here because I was writing something about it today. Let me pull it up so that I give you the right numbers. So 139 different clinical centres in 34 countries around the world. And they've been collecting data for over 10 years now, I believe. And the other presenter was Jan Hillert, Professor Jan Hillert from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And again, they've got a big registry where they're collecting data. And lots of the other countries are collecting the data. But what you would hear from them in terms of one of their messages, and we have interviews, we recorded interviews with them that will go up on the Melbourne Brain Centre Royal Melbourne Hospital Facebook page. We'll also share them on MStranslate as well. One of the things that they talk about is collecting the data is only part of it. You need people who can understand the data and understand how to analyse it. And so that's now the process that the research is going through, is how do we actually analyse that data to answer some of these questions that we're interested in. But, you know, that's that study that I talked about earlier that showed that these treatments were having long-term benefits. That was from analysing all of this data from all of these people. So, you know, the data is there. Obviously for some of the newer medications. So, you know, you mentioned, Sally, that you were taking Ocrevus. Because this is quite new, we obviously don't have lots of long-term data on that yet. So Ocrevus wasn't one of the ones that was studied in that project that I mentioned, just because the data is not available. But as we get more and more people using Ocrevus for lengthier periods of time, then that's all going to build in there as well. So it's important that this information is being captured, and it is, and that's, you know, a hugely positive thing that the MS community is doing by sharing this information to help researchers. The data's there, and it's now just, you know, continuing to analyse it. And there's lots of projects and lots of questions that continue to be asked and continue to be attempted, at least, to be answered. But another thing to mention at this point is that not only can the MS community be involved in helping to give that data and give that information, which is important, but also helping to come up with questions that need to be answered. You know, if there are things that, especially through MStranslate, because we can link between you guys, the MS community and the research community, if there are questions or things that happen with medications or you know, other things that could be answered looking into the data that you might experience, you know, that's actually really helpful for researchers to know about, so that they can then go, all right, well, we can look at the data and try and work out why that is. So one of my big messages, and I think it's appropriate again on World MS Day to have a message like this, is that the MS community has so much power in terms of being able to accelerate research and really determine the direction of the research project. So if there's things that you're interested in or things that trouble you or bother you that you would like an answer for, you know, making people aware of that so that you know, that can be looked into is important. So, you know, if you've got any of those thoughts while we're talking, if there's anything that you have experienced yourself, or, you know, that people in a group that you talk to have experienced and you all sort of have the same thing, you know, drop those thoughts on here as well. You know, if there's potential to investigate it, we can pass that on to researchers. So I'm just scrolling back to that original article that I was sharing through. So Christy asks, meds like Tecfidera and Gilenya considered escalation. See you, Castle. Enjoy your dinner. Thank you for participating. We know that this time is difficult for some people because it's in the dinner time. We always try and find the best time to do them. If anyone can suggest a time that would be perfect, let us know. We're happy to do it in a way that most people can participate. Obviously, whoever's watching it right now is happy to do it right now. But if there would be a better time, please do let us know for that as well. Meds like Tecfidera and Gilenya considered escalation. So Gilenya, for example, what is certainly classified as one of the higher efficacy drugs. So in the study that I talked about that looked at the delay of onset of progressive MS, that was when they categorized their two classes of lower efficacy and higher efficacy. Gilenya was in there. Tecfidera, I don't believe they had enough data on to include that in this current study. But I would guess that would also be in the higher efficacy. But I'm not 100% sure how they would classify that. But Gilenya definitely would be considered escalation. But it really depends. Again, I mean, we're not using. There isn't a standard at the moment in terms of using escalation versus induction. So some people might be started on something like Gilenya, whereas, you know, other people might be started on something less than that. So in terms of calling escalation versus not, it's hard at the moment. But that would certainly be one of the, you know, generally how we would talk about it is more that you have the lower ones. So in this study, for example, they looked at Copaxone interferons versus, say, Tysabri, Gilenya, and Lemtrada as the higher ones. So, yeah, I don't know if that 100% answers your question, Christy, but that's sort of how they were categorizing it in that study anyway. Wendy, there's never a perfect time, but Aaron Boster's videos are excellent. Yeah, I have seen them. He does do a great job. Obviously, we're happy to record videos as well. The advantage of this and the reason why we do the Facebook Lives is because I want to come and chat to you guys and have the interaction. But if you like more of those sort of short style videos, we can certainly look at doing those as well as a way of being able to provide updates on MS research. So yeah, thank you for that. Sally, I had a friend today that was at the Newcastle Symposium and she mentioned a speaker that spoke about neurological psychiatry. She thought this was a major area that hit a lot of people with MS. It was not an area spoken about as much as it should be. So, I mean, just sort of in terms of talking about psychiatric problems that mental health problems that can be associated with multiple sclerosis, is that sort of what you're talking about there, Sally? Is that just to make sure I understand what we're talking about before I launch into a response that may or may not be appropriate. You spoke about the chemical changes associated and caused by MS. Yeah, so I mean, just it would be really interesting to know who that is, because especially if you resonated with the MS community, we'd love to have him to come on and do an interview with us to get out to all the people who follow MStranslate, to do a Facebook Live video like this so that you guys can ask questions. Certainly interested in that. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of information now that looks at causes of mental health issues and looks at overlap with multiple sclerosis. So for example, there's been a lot of information about depression that indicates that it's inflammation in the brain that is actually a driving factor of depression. And we also know that multiple sclerosis is obviously caused by a lot of inflammation, or leads to a lot of inflammation in the brain. We know that people with multiple sclerosis are more likely to get depression than members of the general public. So, you know, is this because of the common causes of it? Is it the inflammation that's going on in part of MS that if it hits a certain part of the brain also leads to depression? We're probably not at the stage yet where we can answer that. But, you know, it is certainly something that's important, and we've looked at statistics before that show how much higher these mental health issues are in people with multiple sclerosis. The rate of suicide is higher in people with multiple sclerosis than it is in the general public. And you know, it is hugely important that we start to shine a light and raise awareness of the mental health problems faced by people living with multiple sclerosis. I don't think it's okay that we just say, well, you know, dealing with multiple sclerosis, that's our focus. And of course, you know, they're not going to feel great from time to time. Mental health is a serious issue, and managing the mental health aspect of multiple sclerosis is hugely important. And I completely agree that it's something we need to do more about talking about. You know, we've written articles about this before, and you know, if there's any sort of information that you guys can provide in terms of, you know, your experiences with this, to help raise awareness and reduce isolation around that, you know, that would be great, because I think that's the first step, telling us what could we do to be better, shining a light on that aspect. You know, that would be good as well. She loved him as, just reading your comment now, Sally, she loved him as she has what she calls no filter when speaking, not so much depression, but outspokenness, etc. Yeah, okay, there has been, some people would say I have no filter either. But yeah, there has been research that's looked into some of the, and actually I've just seen a member of our community who's joined who would be very capable of commenting on this. Welcome, Tony. We're talking a little bit about some of the psychological aspects of multiple sclerosis. So as always, feel free to join in. But there is studies, and I'd have to pull them up to look at the exact details, but there's studies that have looked at sort of social abilities almost of people living with multiple sclerosis and other neurological conditions as well, in terms of their altered abilities to know, you know, how to act in group situations, and things like that. So it is a really interesting area of research. It's certainly not one that I'm completely over, so having an expert in the field like this guy that spoke today would be perfect. You know, we are always encouraging of getting the experts to come in and talk about the areas that they're interested in. I love being here, and I try and stay across as much multiple sclerosis research as I can. And obviously we talk a lot about it, and this is what I do for a living. But you know, I'm never going to know as much about than someone who is specifically researching it. So, you know, again, in those sort of instances, if you hear of someone who's fantastic and who resonates and who's talking about something interested, let us know, and we will contact them, and we will, you know, try as hard as we can to get them to come on board and talk to you guys as well. Isolation is depressing and just downright lonely. Yeah, and it, you know, again, it is something that's really experienced by people living with multiple sclerosis that can't be underestimated. You know, I think the advent of social media has helped a little bit in that people can find online groups to participate in. We hope that MStranslate provides an outlet for that. But it's also just about, you know, raising awareness, and we need to talk about these things. We need to talk about the things that suck. I love being able to talk to you guys about exciting breakthroughs, things that might be really beneficial, but we need to also talk about the stuff that's not great. You know, we need to talk about trials that have failed. We need to talk about how difficult it is to live with MS and all of the parts that, you know, in day-to-day life that the general public don't understand. You know, that I, even though I have been involved with multiple sclerosis for a long time, don't understand. You know, the theme of World MS Day today is invisible symptoms. That isolation is one of them. You know, trying to make people understand what fatigue feels like for someone living with MS. It's not, you know, I didn't get much sleep last night and I'm a bit tired. You know, being able to explain that and get that across to the public so that there's a better awareness about what actually living with multiple sclerosis is like is really important. Hi, Kathy, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Long time no see. Monday feels like a world away. And that's okay. You're allowed to watch Tim Ferguson if you prefer him over me. That's fine. Tim does great job for the MS community as well. Dr. Luke Smith. Okay, fantastic. I will note that down, Sally, and I will see if we can get in touch with him. And who knows, the next Facebook Live video might be with him if we're lucky. And then we'll see where we go. Wendy, we also need to talk about the positives despite the odds. Yeah, and I completely agree. Look, we don't want to always be focusing on the negatives, and it's about that balance. Let's focus on you know, great things that are happening. Let's talk about the positives. But if there is a time when someone needs to talk about the fact that things aren't great, let's give them an outlet where they can do that as well. Because I think one of the toughest things is going through that rough patch and feeling like you don't have an outlet for it, and feeling that sense of loneliness. And so we need to be able to provide an environment where people feel okay doing that as well. Hi, Julie, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So we're just really having a general chat about MS and MS research at the moment. So if you don't know who I am, for people watching, in case you don't know who I am, my name's Brett. I'm one of the co-founders of MStranslate. I do all of our science communication work, and I'm an MS researcher by background. So if you have comments or questions that you want to ask about really anything, drop them in that comment section and I will get around to responding to them as we go through. So the next thing that I want to talk about a little bit is some exciting news in terms of new medications that were recently approved by the FDA in the US for the treatment of secondary progressive MS. And these were two, and I'll drop the links to the articles about them in the comments section as well. So the first one was siponimod, or Mayzent as it's being marketed as, and there's the article for that one. And The second one was Mavenclad, or Cladribine. Don't know why they had two that had almost identical names approved at the same time. It made it confusing for some people, definitely. That have been approved in the US for the treatment of secondary progressive MS. Now, importantly, these were approved for the treatment of active secondary progressive MS. Now, what this means, and what research actually, again, led by the team here in Melbourne, led by Thomas Kalinchik, showed in a paper a couple of years ago now, is that these disease-modifying therapies can actually still be effective in secondary progressive MS if there's still inflammation. So some people with secondary progressive MS still can have relapses, they can still have inflammatory disease happening. And what this research showed, that in those people, they should be kept on treatments because those treatments are still having benefits. And the theory before this sort of came out was that once people got to secondary progressive MS, no one would benefit anymore from these treatments. Whereas this research showed that is not the case, and actually had quite big regulatory impacts around the world, certainly in somewhere New Zealand, where once people got to a certain EDSS, they were no longer covered for any disease-modifying therapies, whereas this showed that people could still benefit. So both of these beneficial have been approved for active secondary progressive MS in the US. My understanding at the moment, and I do need to look this up just to confirm, is that that's not the case here yet. Cladribine has been launched in Australia. Let me look this up. Has been launched here in Australia, but I believe, and it is on the PBS, but I believe that's just for relapsing remitting MS at this stage here. Siponimod, I'm not so sure of. Look that up as well. I don't believe that Siponimod is here yet, or listed here yet. But as with other treatments that we've seen, often the FDA approval is a precursor to getting approval around the world. They're often one of the first ones, and everyone takes that lead. So we may see Siponimod being approved and Cladribine being approved for active secondary progressive MS later in this year, hopefully, if not next year. But exciting now that we're getting some treatments approved around the world for people living with SPMS, because we know that is an area where we need more. Obviously, this is just for the active forms. We still need better targeted therapies of it. But that's another new development that's happened recently that's positive. Sally, with all the research we currently have, do we have an average time frame between relapsing, remitting, and secondary? Really good question. So there is data around that, and it is very much in terms of an average. But we did film, when we filmed an interview with Thomas after that paper that I mentioned earlier in the year regarding this, he did talk about this concept, and I'm going to pull up the video so that I can drop that in the comment section so that you can hear exactly what he has to say about it. But so I drop that into the comment section. So there's the interview with Thomas talking about this, and he talks specifically about that time frame. And I have to watch it back, and do watch it. But think he talked about the average time frame now being over 30 years, but mentioning that as we sort of go through now, that if that's the sort of average time frame that what we're looking at, a lot of people now won't actually progress to secondary progressive MS in their lifetime. So, you know, again, that's showing the benefits that these treatments are having, as well as all of the other things that I guess we're now learning in terms of how we can also reduce progression of disease through different lifestyle factors and things like that. So that point is specifically covered in that video. So certainly watch that, and that will give you a specific answer around that question. But yeah, he certainly mentions the length of time, and it's quite lengthy to the point where I know in that video he did say what it means now is that a lot of people won't actually progress. Wendy, can I ask why Ocrevus is not infused every 5 months in the first 18 months? I feel like I am back in the weeks. I feel like I am back in the weeks leading up to diagnosis. That's why Ocrevus is not infused every 5 months in the first 18 months. Sorry, can you just, well, the second part of that question, I feel like I'm back in the weeks leading up to diagnosis. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that in terms of why they've got the treatment schedule that they have for Ocrevus? Is that what you're asking, or you're asking why it's not just a standard for every person? I'm sure it's not your question. I'm sure it's me. Having been talking for 50 minutes, I'm getting a little slower. Just trying to understand exactly what you're asking there. It seems to wear off after 5 months. So you're asking why they don't do it, why the schedule isn't every 5 months. Now it's 14 weeks, so it'd be 3 and a bit months. Yeah, I mean, this will, I would assume, and again, this isn't an area of expertise for me in terms of understanding exactly why they're doing that. The timing of the treatments will be based on information that they would have received during the clinical trials. What is important and what we will get now is real-world data, and real-world data is very different to clinical trial data. So it may be that gets modified as we start to get observations of people on it over time. And again, I would say that many people react differently, so that will be part of the process as well in terms of, you know, it may wear off quicker for some people than others. So all of this will have been based on large amounts of data and what they've seen across the population of the people trialled, but it doesn't necessarily mean on an individual level that will work. But you know, it will also be to do with dosing and safety and things like that. So I'm just reading through all of the new comments that are coming through. 4 to 6 weeks before, when I started, I was 14. 4 to 6 weeks before infusions, I found I regressed, but each time it became shorter. Why not sooner? Lots of people report feeling like they're overdue for next infusion, often in the 5th month. Okay, I mean this is really useful information that I can take back to researchers so that they can look into it. There will be lots of reasons as to 24 weeks, not 14. Okay. There will be reasons why they've done that, whether it's that's where they saw the best results. There will probably be safety reasons about doing it more often than that. I assume that they would find that if they maybe reduce that some of the side effect risks increase. So it will be a benefit of getting them, a balance between getting the most benefits out of the treatment versus the risks associated with it. I can certainly look into that question more, and it's certainly something that I could put to researchers and say, hey, look, as we now start to collect all of this data about people taking Ocrevus, a lot of people are saying that their treatment effects drop off, the benefits from the treatment drop off around the 5th month. Can we see in the data why that is? Is there, is it just being processed and there's no more drug around by that time, or what's going on? To try and get some answers. But that's really interesting information. Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is we can start to get this information together, and that's part of the reason why these sort of events are really important, why having interaction and getting comments is really important, because the information that the MS community can provide is invaluable. We need to know what's happening, and the more that we find that out, if an individual goes up to the neurologist and says, after 5 months, after 4 months, I feel like I start to regress and the treatment's not working as well, we can look into that more. But really important. I will start to talk to people about that, and we'll see what we can find out. But that's really interesting information. All right. That's kind of most of my current treatment things that I want to talk about. Are there any other topics that people want to discuss? I'm happy to move on to a topic that someone raises. Otherwise, I've got a couple of others that I want to talk about in terms of recent research developments, but I'll give myself a minute to rest the voice and see if anyone's got any things in particular that they'd like to talk about or like to ask about. We can talk about that. We have a heap of people watching at the moment, which is fantastic. Welcome to everyone that is watching. If you are watching and want to join in the conversation, don't be shy. All you have to do is drop a question in the comments. I will answer every question that comes through. Even if you don't want to ask a question, just say hi so that we know who's here. I really like to get to know who's on board. But if you don't want to as well, feel free to just watch and hear the information. For those of you that are watching, if you haven't liked the post yet, if you could like the post or share it so that other people in your network can see it, that would be great as well. Why is it not mandatory at diagnosis for patients to be tested to check immunity of viruses that require live vaccines prior to starting immune suppressant medication? I'm in a 6-month break between therapies now because I've since learned I'm not immune to measles. Really interesting question. Not one that I know the answer to. I wonder if that differs in different parts of the world in terms of the protocol around that. It's a really valid point. One that I would have thought is certainly part of the screening process before going on medications, to have an idea as to build up a risk profile, really, to see, what are you protected against, considering you are about to go on an immune suppressive medication generally. But yeah, that's really interesting. Again, it's not something I've heard of before. Other people in our community who are watching might be able to share their experience with that in terms of whether or not they were done for that. Obviously, the one that we know happens a lot is checking for previous infection or infection with JC virus, JCV, as that's the one that we've seen as can cause quite serious problems in association with MS medications, where an individual can develop PML, which can be fatal. So that is certainly one that they are quite big on checking for. But I'm interested to hear, other than that, what is everyone else's experience in terms of that? I'm in Australia and anxious about measles popping up everywhere. Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. Again, it's something that I can ask the neurologists that we work with in terms of their sort of thoughts around this. But yeah, I mean, I guess that there is a standard in terms of if you're on these medications, as being as careful as possible around that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting that it's not as routine, and which ones they test for, I guess, is something that would be great to hear more about from members of our community. Sally, thoughts on flu shot, one on immunosuppressants in light of deadly flu season this year? Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, that's certainly a conversation to have with your healthcare professional or your neurologist. I'm not a clinician by training at all, and so I am really careful when talking about any sort of clinical work. I don't want to say too much in terms of that. It's not my place to talk about it. There are certainly we can talk about research around it, but in terms of whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, that's just certainly a conversation to have on an individual level with your neurologist. A scientist working on vaccines for JC virus or Epstein-Barr virus? Yeah, really good question. So a lot of people are saying that they've had the flu vaccine without any problems. Obviously, there might be slight differences depending on medications that people are taking, but yeah, that is certainly not something that I want to comment too much on, and certainly other people would say no, and so again, something that I don't want to comment on too much. I've certainly heard both sides of the story. People here saying that they're fine with it, other people commenting and saying that it's not something that they would get. So have that conversation. Working on vaccines for JC virus or Epstein-Barr virus. So in terms of MS, I haven't heard a lot to do with vaccines for JC virus. People are certainly looking into treatments for it. Better testing for it is also really important. Quicker testing for it is something people are working on. But Epstein-Barr virus and treating Epstein-Barr virus as a way of helping treat MS is certainly something that's happening. So we've talked a little bit before about research that's happening through the University of Queensland. Professor Michael Pender has been interested in Epstein-Barr virus for many, many years now, and its potential link to multiple sclerosis. And he's done some really interesting work around this, and there's some trials ongoing in the area where what he's looked at is so the problem with Epstein-Barr virus is that it's a chronic infection, so it hangs around once you get infected. It stays around, and most people in the population have been infected with Epstein-Barr virus. It's just that not all of us will get glandular fever, which is the sort of symptomatic disease that it causes. But so we never fully clear Epstein-Barr virus. So what Professor Pender's research has been is to look at, if we take T cells, so cells in the immune system that react against viruses, if we take them out of an individual and grow them up in a lab and grow them up in the presence of the virus, essentially to soup up their response so they become hyperactivated against this virus, become really effective at killing it, and then put them back into the body, what are the effects of that? And so a number of years ago now, probably 4 or 5 years ago, he looked at doing this in a one person living with MS, found that they doing it cleared the virus, and that they saw some symptom improvement in terms of their multiple sclerosis. Now, anyone who follows and has followed MStranslate for a long time will know what we think about studies when it's only n equals one person. There's not too many conclusions that we can draw from that. But it was certainly interesting enough to go, okay, this is something we should pursue. They've got some trial results earlier this year that have also been positive, and now they're going on to some bigger trials with that. So that is certainly an interesting area of research. I'm trying to find that article, and I believe it is this one. Yeah, so this was their results that they published late last year from a phase 1 trial of people living with progressive MS. Again, it was a small trial. If I look through the paper here, just on that, just to give you some updates on it. So if I click onto the just trying to find the abstract for that. Here it is. So this was only 5 people with SPMS and 5 people with PPMS. So again, it's a small trial. They saw some positive results. So it's certainly something that's being pursued, but lots more work to do in that area before we know for sure. But yeah, in terms of looking for an effective way of treating EBV, that is ongoing, and certainly is a way of treating it in a way that may be beneficial for people living with MS. Julie, I'm 9 years on Tysabri. Am I at a higher risk due to length of time to become JCV positive? Good question. Now, there was the Bart's MS blog had a really good graph of this on their website that I'll try and find, because it showed really nicely the risk of PML. I will try and find. I'm just trying to find the link to it, because it was here. Yeah, I'll leave that with me. I will try and do it. I will link you to this page that they do have, which does go through that goes through all of the different risks of PML with Tysabri, so it's worth having a read through that. it goes into lots of different outcomes. So that will probably answer your question. Possibly there is a slight increase over time, but that will be true of any. We've seen it with other treatments now as well for MS. But that will go through it in some good detail. They've done a really good job on the PML side of things. Kathy, by the way, Brett, Tim Ferguson is not better than you. He's just a little more famous. I think he's probably both. I think he's probably better than me, more famous. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Tim, actually. It would be great to, if anyone knows Tim and has met Tim before, feel free to let him know about MStranslate. And maybe we could get him on here one time to do one of these as well. That would be fantastic. Sally, where are we up to in research about remyelination? I hear a CEO on the TV this week saying there has been advancements and his cure is looking at being possible within a 10-year period. Okay, there's lots of things to break down in that question. So let's talk about remyelination. Huge area of research. The next biggest step, I think, in terms of advancing our treatment of MS is having some way of being able to repair the damage that is occurring in MS. So all of the treatments that we have at the moment are effective in terms of trying to stop new damage from occurring, essentially, but none of them really work to repair any existing damage. And so being able to do that is the next step, and that's myelin repair or remyelination. There are lots of different strategies that are going on in terms of that, but we can probably break them down into two big categories. So one is looking at small molecules that can start up that process in the body. And so we've talked to people before, Travis Stiles from Novaron Bioscience in San Diego is investigating a molecule or a compound that may be able to do that. Ari Green's team from University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, have identified a molecule found in antihistamines that may be able to do that. Biogen have got their anti-lingo therapy that looks at doing that. And all of these are in similar ways linked to a pathway. What's important is that actually remyelination is really possible in most people. If you get a concussion or some sort of virus, all of these things can lead to demyelination. The difference is that in people that don't have MS, that can be fixed. That myelin can be repaired. So if I get a concussion, there's some damaged myelin, that myelin gets repaired. That myelin repair process is blocked in people living with MS. And so a lot of these molecules that people are designing are ways around that block. So it's trying to get into that pathway but go around what's being blocked. The other area is in terms of stem cells. Now, we talk about stem cells a lot for a lot of different reasons. I gave a talk to an MS group earlier this week where I said that stem cells are essentially like those kids at high school that don't know what they want to be yet when they grow up. Like me, really. It's not just kids in high school. It's me as well. I might grow up eventually. But so these are cells that haven't yet decided where they want to go or what they want to be. And so what we can do in various ways in the lab and what people are trying to do is work out how they can send these cells into different directions to do the function that we want them to do. So, can we take stem cells and turn them into cells that are going to help repair myelin? And so there was a study published really recently that looked at taking stem cells from hair follicles and being able to do this. We've looked at, so I will link that because I published it recently. We've looked at a group from New York, the Tisch Center in New York, that are looking at a different sort of stem cells that can do that, and they're in a phase 2 trial, or recruiting for a phase 2 trial at the moment for that. So this is, it's certainly a big area of research. We're still in very early days with it all. So the Tisch study is phase 2, and that's, in the recruitment phase, so a few years off that, they've got phase 3 trials. All of these other compounds that we talk about, they're really in the early stages. They're not even hugely in clinical trials yet for a lot of them. So, it's getting there. People have said that they expect, so experts in the field think, a 5 to 6, somewhere in that 5 to 10 year range is reasonable in terms of when we think we might start to have medications for myelin repair out on the market and available. So hopefully that answers the remyelination part of it. In terms of a cure within 10 years, I think it depends on how do we define a cure. And again, I wrote an article on this quite a while ago, which I think has got a little bit of interest because I've seen the same general sort of thing talked about in a few different spaces, where I talked about redefining what we mean by a cure for MS. So, really, if we're talking about a cure, we need to know the cause. And do I think that we're going to find out the cause of MS in the next 10 years? I don't know. And until we have the cause, can we actually have a proper cure? No, I don't think so. But if we think about a cure in terms of just being hugely effective management of multiple sclerosis, then maybe that's more reasonable. So here's the article. I'll drop the link to the article that I wrote talking about that. But if we think at the moment we've got treatments that can quite effectively stop or slow the disease, if we partner that with a treatment that can repair the damage, and if we can add on to that lifestyle factors that can help keep the body in a really good environment, for want of a better term, to keep the disease as low as possible. So, adding in exercise and diet, things to be able to complement those other strategies, then we're getting to a point where we're talking about, almost complete management of the disease. I don't think that's a cure, but I think it's a really excellent outcome. Now, I think we need to be really careful still how we talk about these things, because all of what we know about multiple sclerosis is that it's very different for individuals. So I don't want to use a term like a cure, because even if we can come up with these strategies where we can really effectively manage it, they may not work in everyone, right? We know that treatments don't work in everyone. We know that certain treatments work in some people, others in others. Is the myelin repair going to be similar? Is the damage going to be too much? I think calling it a cure without clarifying what that is, we need to be really careful about it, because obviously as soon as we start mentioning the word cure, that understandably gets people very excited, raises a lot of hope. So I think, we need to be really careful about how we talk about that. But I think we're getting to a phase, and hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, we could be at a point where we can, for a lot of people living with MS, start to really effectively manage the disease and start to, improve symptoms. So that's kind of I hope that was a very long-winded way of answering your question, Sally, but hopefully, I think it's important that I'm really clear about how I think about it. So hopefully that answers your question. That fluff on your face is not an indicator of maturation. No, it very much is not. This is, yeah. We don't need to talk about my lack of an ability to grow a beard. Well, no, Sally, I wish people would. I'm more than happy to appear on national television, but no one's asked. So if anyone wants to put me on national television and talk about this sort of stuff, I'd be happy to. But that's, I think it's just, for me, the reason that I talk about it like this a lot is because, to go off on a bit of a tangent, but my life has changed quite a bit over the past 6 or 7 years that we've been doing MStranslate, because while I had an affiliation for MS before that, having researched it for a long time, your appreciation for it differs hugely when you start to interact with the MS community. And having given many talks to MS groups, having met many people living with MS, having interacted with many people online, it makes it all a lot more real, and it makes it, people, you just get to a point where you have to be more careful about how you talk about it, because the sort of impact that research and the reporting of that research has on people. And so, while I'd love to sit here and go, yeah, I think we're going to have a cure as well, it's got to be balanced, and it's got to be put in context. And that's why when we publish exciting stuff like that hair follicle study that I put up, there is bits in that say, this was done in mice or done in lab culture. So this is a long way from being something that will potentially be beneficial, but it's exciting. But let's understand that process. Anyway, I've probably talked enough about that. But happy, as I said, put me on national TV. I have a face that's more for radio, but if they can do some wonders with airbrushing or makeup or something, I'd be happy to appear on that as well. Why is stem cell therapy so third world in Australia as opposed to other countries? Why is it available as a therapy overseas but not in Australia? Good question. So, it is certainly something that is, I think the focus has shifted here, and it is something that is being done. So there are trials at St Vincent's in Sydney that's looking into it. They are doing quite a rigorous study, including people living with MS, with HSCT. There is, work going into it. People here have, there was a time when people received it here as well, and we did focus a couple of stories on that. As to why, that's not a question I have the answer to. I think where we are getting is that we're getting some really strong evidence now to show that this can be a beneficial treatment, and a long-term beneficial treatment for people living with MS. Certainly, those early in disease with aggressive disease seem to benefit strongly. In terms of when it's going to become more readily available here, only time will tell. The more data we get, the harder it's going to be to ignore. Obviously, the St Vincent study will help because it is a local study. But there was a big study that was published earlier this year as well, from a team. It was through a few different countries, but led by a group from the US that showed, and I'll link that in here as well, showed that it can be, HSCT could be more effective than some currently available medications. Now, in the article, if you read it, I say that I'm not hugely comfortable making that comparison yet, just because of the way the study was performed. All other treatments were lumped into one group. We obviously know that some are more effective than others, so that will have affected some of the conclusions. But certainly I think we're at a point now where we can almost categorically state that HSCT is a beneficial treatment for some people living with MS. And the safety concerns that were with it originally have certainly decreased as they're learning better and better how to do that original chemotherapy step, so that they get the benefits while decreasing the risks. Yeah, as to why, can't answer that, but I think we will see it at some point. Are researchers any closer in thinking of what is the cause of MS? Excellent question, Julie. Are we closer? Yes. Are we close? I don't know. I know that seems like a bit of a cop-out answer, but that's probably where we're at. We certainly, we have a lot of genetic information now that we didn't have 10 years ago that shows all of the variations of genes that can increase your risk of developing MS. We know that it's not a genetic disease, so there has to be environmental factors that are involved as well. We know things like smoking is one of the environmental factors that can increase risk. Obviously things like infections might, vitamin D levels might, but how those genes and environmental factors interact, what they specifically are, that's still we don't know. So yes, we are getting more and more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, but working out how all those pieces fit together is still really difficult. So, and part of the problem is that, especially when there was research from Canada published, I believe last year, that sort of suggested that on average people had MS for 5 years, roughly, before they were diagnosed with MS. That means that those initial things that are happening, we're really missing. I mean, by the time we're collecting data on people with MS, they've already had the disease for quite a while, and that makes it really difficult to know what the cause is and look into that. So, yeah, it's going to be a difficult question. It's always going to be a difficult question to answer. I'm hopeful that eventually we will get that answer. We are learning more, but yeah, closer. Are we close? Harder to say. Thank you, Wendy. I'm just getting to your comment now. Hopefully you are eating and enjoying your meal. Thank you for your kind words. It's a pleasure. As I said, I love doing this. Thanks, Castle. I'm not sure that's true, but anyway, thank you for the compliment. Christine, are you doing any research into the new drug Ocrevus? My daughter has developed Crohn's, arthritis, and vasculitis since commencing infusions. So interesting. I mean, I'm not doing the research myself, so my role now through MStranslate is just to summarize all of the research that's going on and present it to you guys in a way that you can understand, in a way that's easily accessible for you. I'm sure there is all of this information will be being collected. In terms of your question, I wonder if all in your compare notes. Certainly in things like MSBase, which is the database that we talked about before, all of that data that's being recorded from all of these centres around the world can be accessed by those centres so that they can get information from other clinics in terms of these things. Obviously at conferences it's something that is talked about. I will be likely attending the ECTRIMS conference again towards the end of this year, which will be the big MS conference where they will talk about these things. So if anything, I will be doing Facebook Live videos after that, if not during it, update you guys on everything that's discussed there. And certainly I think Ocrevus will be talked about a lot, because we will be starting to get some fairly significant data from people who have been taking it. You know, I can look into if anything's been published on that to see what's going on, and if I hear anything, I'll update you. Obviously, very sorry to hear about all of the complications that your daughter's developed since starting with it. Hopefully, they can be resolved. But yeah, it's not something that I'm looking into at the moment. But I'm sure the data is being collected, and we will start to see some things on it. Where is MStranslate heading for the remainder of 2019? What's on the agenda after World MS Day? Good question. So probably the biggest thing in our calendar for this year will be, again, as I just said, attending the ECTRIMS meeting in Stockholm towards the end of the year in September. This is a huge conference, and it's really important that we're in the room. Last year was the first year that I was able to attend after having many frustrating years of having to just share secondhand information that other people had reported, which I don't love doing, because obviously I like making sure that things are as accurate as possible. So I like to hear it myself so that I can hear and see the data and then report it back to you guys. So we will be there again this year. So that will give us a chance to update you on all of the newest information in MS research, as well as hopefully interview a bunch of researchers. We shared one interview with Helen Tremlett. We have a few others from last year's meeting that I am really keen to share. We're just getting final sign-off from the people involved to do that. Other than that, we always have lots of interesting and big ideas that are really shaped by you guys. So if there's things that I know that the MS community is crying out for, they're things that we will prioritize. So obviously our bread and butter, I guess, is that we will continue to be providing up-to-date, accurate, independent information of MS research. We will hopefully be getting some other people on board to talk about their research, and we're constantly in conversations with different researchers from around the world to talk about that, so that we can get them to talk directly to you guys. We'd love to do some Facebook Live videos where we have someone other than me talking to you. Again, if you know any researchers or research that you would like to hear more about, let us know, and we'll look into that. You know, we started going down the path of trying to help support research by crowdfunding for it. It's still something we're looking into. We just need to work out the best ways of doing it. You know, MStranslate, again, happy to be going out and giving in-person talks to groups. As I said, I was at a group earlier this week. If you're part of any groups around Australia or overseas while I'm over there later in the year, if there's a desire for it, you know, that's the sort of thing that we're happy to do as well. But as I said, it's for us. We are extremely passionate about this, and there's no limits to what we see as being able to do. We just want to do the things that are going to provide the most benefits for people living with MS and the MS community in general. And I have lots and lots of ideas for that. It's just a matter of finding more hours in the day to do them. Yeah, there's lots. I could go on and on about all of the different things that I want to do and that Eric wants to do, but we have big plans. But importantly, I think what I can say is that we will continue doing this. You know, we will continue to provide this information because I see it as hugely important that you guys have access to it. So, you know, MStranslate will be continuing through 2019, through 2020, beyond, because I love doing it. We're passionate about it. We think it's important. But we will continue to grow. We will continue to expand, and we will continue to do new things that reflect what you guys want. How are you guys funded? I hope it's not just a love job. Kathy, he isn't funded. He's sleeping on his mum and dad's couch. It's not 100% accurate. The first bit is very accurate, though. Yeah, we aren't hugely funded for MStranslate. In fact, for MStranslate itself, we don't really receive any funding. I mean, 99% of what we do is unfunded on this page. All of those articles that we're writing, all of the videos that we're producing, you know, these Facebook Live videos, all of that, all of the time spent reading all of the journal articles, going out and talking to groups, all of that, that's all done for free. We don't receive any funding for that. It's not to say that we don't want funding for it. We would, you know, we would love to be able to receive funding so that we can devote even more time to this and do some of those things that we really want to do. But it's just a matter of finding the right way to do that. You know, we have certain things paths that we won't go down. So often when people talk about funding, for example, pharmaceutical funding comes up, that's something that we have just decided we won't do, because while obviously we would love to be funded for this work, and we know that we would never lose any sort of independence or integrity from receiving that funding. We just understand that the perception would change towards us, in terms of that people might worry that there was some sort of bias in the things that we were reporting. And what we love and what we think you guys love is the fact that we are independent, so you don't have to worry about any of that sort of stuff. So that, for example, is something that we wouldn't do. So while we would love to get funding, it's just finding the right way of doing that. And then until then, we keep doing it and we find other ways and do other work to get some funding in to support this. Okay, I've fallen way behind in terms of reading comments. So give me a couple of minutes to just read through all of that stuff that's just come up, and I will respond to it as we go through it. So let me just, 2 seconds. Christine, thank you for all the work that you do. I look forward to hearing about the research from Ekstrom's. Ochreutis has worked wonderfully for her MS, but the additional autoimmune diseases are a problem. Yeah, look, thank you for your kind words. I will be reporting as much as I can from Ekstrom's. And yeah, as I said, hopefully, great to hear that she's seen the benefits from the treatment for MS, and hopefully the other side effects can be resolved. My daughter is pregnant. Is it a good idea for her to have vitamin D? We are going into winter in New Zealand. Again, clinically, you know, I can't really talk about that as I'm not a clinician. Certainly, it's a question to ask a neurologist. There is lots of research indicating that vitamin D supplementation can be beneficial in people living with MS. Certainly, that most people with MS have, or a lot of people with MS tend to have lower levels of vitamin D. So, yeah, I mean, there is evidence to suggest it can be beneficial. It's certainly not harmful, you know, without going into really high doses, but certainly a question to ask a neurologist or healthcare professional about that. Anna, I'm so over this disease. I'm sure everyone else that's watching tonight could completely understand that sentiment. You know, hopefully being able to be here and participate in things like this help a little bit. You know, you are very much not alone. even though I know it can feel isolating. There is exciting stuff on the horizon in terms of the research world, but yeah, I'm sure lots of people would understand that. Thank you, Julie. It was great to have you on board. I hope you enjoyed it. We love having new people participate, so definitely come back next time. We'll be doing them again soon. Thank you, Sally. It's my pleasure. As I said, I really enjoy it. It's something that I feel strongly passionate about. It's something that I, you wake up every morning feeling excited about doing, which is the main thing. So, no thanks necessary. You say, partied hard age 14 to 18 when I met my darling husband in a nightclub, both 18. I got my first MS symptoms 5 months later and still together 24 years on. Well, shout out to your husband as well. I think, one of the things that we hear consistently is the, important role that support people and a support network is for people who are in MS. And, I would love to do something where we also shine a light on the amazing people in your lives as well and the people that help with that. So fantastic to hear stories like that. Castle. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for all your information. Yeah, look, certainly keep participating in these. It's great to have you on board and things. I used to smoke a pack of Winnie Blues a day and Dave made me quit. Well, good work, Dave. We certainly do have, a lot of information now about smoking, both in terms of definitely increases the risk of developing MS, and there is now significant information that shows that it can also worsen progression. So, quitting smoking is certainly something. If you are a smoker, quitting smoking is something that can be a way of helping to manage the disease. Just been prescribed Mavenclad after years of Gilenya. Do you know much about it? Know little bits about it. We certainly don't have a lot of long-term information, long-term data on cladribine yet, other than the clinical trial information. I have published, and if you scroll back through the comments, I've published a link to an article about cladribine based on it having been approved for active secondary progressive MS, but a lot of the information there in terms of how it works will still be relevant. So you can have a look at that. It's another treatment that works by modulating the immune system, so trying to reduce the autoimmune aspect of multiple sclerosis, really by bringing down both T and B cells, so two cells that are part of the immune system, and reduces those going around the body. So reduces the number that can be there to attack. But have a look at that article, and then, if you have some more questions, more than happy to answer them. Kiscobyte MS funding. We don't receive any of the Kiscobyte MS funding. I think a lot of that goes to MS research, so it's certainly a really useful place for it to go. No funding, no food. We still manage to eat. We do manage to eat. But look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not interested in having discussions that could open up avenues of funding for us. Not to get rich. We're never going to get rich off this. I don't want to get rich off this. In fact, if we had a lot of funding, a lot of the funding that we got would be distributed into projects that would help people living with MS. I talked to a group on Monday about my long-term goal for this. One of my big projects that, I would love to do at some point once the funding comes in. But, if anyone has any ideas for that, certainly feel free either to contact us privately through Facebook mention it here. You can send me an email, brett@mstranslate.com.au, or lowercase Brett has 2 T's. I'm happy to have those discussions. But yeah, grateful that it showed who my true friends are. Learn to say I love you to everyone important to me. That's fantastic, Castle. We should all do that. We should all do that as much as we can, but it's fantastic to hear that you have. Kathy, get yourself registered as charity. Look, it's certainly something that we're looking into. You know, there's a big process involved, and as we say, without any funding, it's not necessarily an easy process to go down doing. If we knew that there was a big push from the MS community to do it, that would help us make that decision. But yeah, it's certainly one of the options that we're looking into. Are the Trevor, CBD, Murdoch root, natural ailments, are they beneficial to MS? Good question. So CBD, for example, there is a lot of evidence that shows that it could be beneficial for people living with MS. In terms of things like spasticity, for example, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that it can be beneficial for that. There is some evidence to suggest it might be beneficial for pain. It's ongoing. There is evidence coming out about that, and there are studies being done around the world to look into whether CBD might be useful for it. Murdoch root, I don't know much about. I haven't read anything about that, so I can't really comment. But there are projects going on in terms of things, natural things that might be beneficial. We did an interview a while back with a guy from the University of Queensland, again, who had found a compound found in plants that seemed to, in very early stage research, could potentially be beneficial. So yeah, I mean, there are things, obviously, you know, things like diet is something that we see as having benefits. So yeah, there is research going into it. Some I know about, some I don't. If you see any publications that you want my analysis of, feel free to send them through, and I'm happy to do that. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Janine, thanks so much for your dedication. We really rely on you. We'll definitely tune in next time. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your comments and your questions. As I said, I really love doing this. I can't believe we've been going for an hour and almost 45 minutes. But yeah, as I said, I say this all the time. I like to do these as often as possible, so I'm sure we'll do one again soon. We are probably getting to the time of night now where everyone's starting to get a bit tired. So, you know, there is still quite a few people watching. So if you are watching and you want to ask some questions, feel free to ask now. I think I've ticked everything off my list that I want to talk about. So now it's, yeah, if there's any last questions, I'm happy to take a few more before we finish up. Otherwise, if you missed any of this, just so you know, this will, and the whole video ends up on the Facebook page as soon as we're done here, so you'll be able to go back and watch it. Obviously, feel free to stop it and start it again at any time. Don't try and sit down and watch all 2 hours of it in one sitting. I don't know that anyone could put up with me for that long. If you have been watching from the start, very impressed. But it will be there, so you'll be able to watch it back at any time. And I agree, you are my go-to for new info and starting point for researching new ideas about MS. Thank you. I mean, that's lovely to hear. I'm glad that you find what we do useful. As I said, really enjoyed doing it. So, you know, if you ever have any things that you see and you want our take on it, just send them through. Happy to comment on them. But I'm, you know, really pleasing to hear that you find it really useful. Thanks, Lynn. Glad to have you joining in. As always, you're always watching these Facebook Lives and participating, so thank you for being on board again. Thanks, Ellie. Thank you for all your questions. Great to have you on board. You know, definitely tune in next time, and feel free to, I guess, as one last message, share the word. You know, if you guys are finding this useful, one of the most beneficial things that you can do for MStranslate is just tell people about us. You know, the more people that we can have watching, the more people that we can have liking the Facebook page. All of those things are really beneficial when we go to researchers and say, you know, do you want to promote your work to the MS community? The higher those numbers, the easier it is. It's just easy to convince them if they know that they're going to get it out to a lot of people. And for you guys, that means that we get new and exciting researchers coming on board to talk about you. So that's certainly something that if you do value the work that we do, just telling anyone who might be interested to, you know, come and like the Facebook page, interact with our content, and continue to engage with the things that we do, you know, that would be fantastic. So thank you all for your participation tonight. It's been great. This is, you know, I'm always amazed at how these successful leads tend to be. I've told the story quite a few times to people that the first time we did a Facebook Live, I was sitting with Eric just before we started the broadcast, and I said, all right, well, we'll put this on and see how it goes. I'll leave it for half an hour. I had some other work with me, so I was just thought I could sit there and do some other work, be online. If anyone comes on and asks questions, I can answer it. If not, after half an hour, I'd just stop it. And the first one, I think, went for about 3 hours. And lots of questions, and then I think I pretty much collapsed from exhaustion at the end of it. But, you know, they continue to be fantastic, and they're fantastic because of you guys. Because whenever we do these broadcasts, you come on, you ask fantastic questions, you interact. You know, you're always coming up with new ideas, and that's what makes them work. It's actually the engagement from all of you. So, you know, while we've been thanking me here, it's really about thanking you guys as well, because without you, I would just be sitting here talking to myself, and that would not be anywhere near as interesting for anyone. So thank everyone. MStranslate it's a community. It's you know, it may have started a number of years ago with Eric and I, and a couple of other supporters, but you know, since then it's really grown, and you know, I am hugely appreciative of it. So thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, that's fantastic, Kathy. That's exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about, just spreading that word around that. So, you know, thank you for doing that. It's fantastic. All right, with no more questions coming through, I think everyone's ready to enjoy the rest of their evening, to get some rest. We will be doing another one of these again soon. Thank you for all the things for me to chase up. In terms of people to try and get on board to talk, questions to be asking researchers, topics to investigate and publish on. Thank you for all of your ongoing support, and we look forward to doing this again. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your evenings.